welcome to you, Mrs. Securis, to Dr. Ward, and to all of those who are viewing this later. I am so very grateful for your kind invitation into your homes and into your communities, and for spending an hour or so with me today. And today we are going to talk about socio-emotional development and stress reduction. I had been struggling to come up with a title for this presentation. I kept thinking, well, what are we really talking about? And really what we are talking about is humanity under construction. So we're going to go with that. As always, this presentation will be available at my SlideShare account. So if you go to slideshare.net and you search my name, you will find it there. You will also find a lot of French recipes, not the same person, but as always, I'm happy to take credit for them if you enjoy them. And just a reminder that everything that we do in the context of Parent University and parent and caregiver education really looks at the intersection between head, heart, and hands. And when we talk about high performance, we're not just talking about academic performance. We are also talking about living healthy and happy lives, realizing our potential, and finding ourselves cultivating and expanding upon our love of lifelong learning. So any advisement, any counsel, anything that I share with you tonight will always go back to that overlap where these things combine. Now, I know that E3 is a high school, and I know that tweendom and teendom can be particularly rough for parents. And I will tell you that you are not alone. There are millions of parents across the globe who are experiencing the same sort of things that you might, and all are asking the same types of questions with similar degrees of angst. And oftentimes it's easy to feel like we are the only ones going through it. But believe me, you are definitely not alone. And my own parents had to deal with a horribly obnoxious kid who barely made it through high school. So things do get better. And if you're wondering why I have this picture, this was me at age 15, a horribly obnoxious kid who had a very foul mouth on him. So that is me. But we're not just going to really talk solely about socio-emotional development. We're also going to talk about adolescent behavior, some things that you may observe, and some things that either have become magnified or exacerbated by the pandemic. And you may remember yourself at this age. I remember myself at this age, and I would not wish myself upon anyone, even my worst enemy, I would not wish myself upon. And this reminds me of a book by Robert Louis Stevenson, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. And in this, there's a description of Mr. Hyde that says he's not easy to describe. There's something wrong with his appearance, something displeasing, something downright detestable. I never saw a man I so disliked, and yet I scarcely know why. He must be deformed somewhere. He gives a strong feeling of deformity, although I couldn't specify the point. And I know that some parents will say, what happened to my sweet baby? How did my sweet baby turn from Dr. Jekyll into Mr. Hyde? And I think what you will find is that, just like we discussed the last time, it will all go back to the neuroscience. It all goes back to the brain. And we can take a look at the brain. And this is a graphic that I believe we shared last time, and you will see that you are here, not you, but your kids are right there in that sweet spot. And I think you will see, when you're a toddler, your brain is most able to change in response to experiences. And as you get older, that flexibility diminishes a bit. So yes, you can teach an old dog new tricks, but it's going to take a lot longer, and it's going to annoy you, and it's going to annoy the dog. But what happens to us in adolescence? Well, you will definitely see an increased intensity of behavior and a diminished ability to hit the brakes. And this has to do with the development of the limbic system and the development of the prefrontal lobe that does not keep pace. As a result, the part of the brain that produces emotions is growing a lot more rapidly than the part of the brain that controls emotions. And what you will see where you reach a kind of equilibrium where the two lines intersect, that is where the brain stops its major growth. We're talking about around age 28, around age 29, and that is where you should be able to see a better control of emotions, better use of executive function. We also see at this age self-consciousness and need for approval, a lot of impulsivity, a lot of want of independence and a desire to experience life. But you will find that the independence is interestingly constructed because it's not independence from everybody, it's primarily independence from parents. And you will also see that there is a level of difficulty in holding back emotions and need for high levels of excitement. And the adolescent brain does not distinguish between types of risk when they take risks. So, taking a risk by making a friend or taking a risk by skateboarding off the side of the building are equivalent, and the adolescent brain is primed for risk taking. It enjoys risk taking. Now, uh, again, we go back to this idea about the neurochemistry of persistence and avoidance. The secret lies here. The secret to understanding adolescence, the secret to understanding people lies right here. And what we try to do as educators and as parents is to create an environment that pushes the neurochemistry of persistence. So again, when you have a positive feeling about a learning experience, and I say a learning experience because every experience we have just about is a learning experience. And what does that do? Now, remember, the brain is survival based. So everything that we do to enhance our survival, including eating and drinking and things like that, will produce this wonderful neurochemical cocktail: endorphins that give you a sense of euphoria, dopamine that stimulates the prefrontal cortex, oxytocin, which is the puppy love chemical. So if you think about when you are first starting out a relationship and all of the things that drive you crazy now, all of those quirks that drive you around the bend are adorable and charming. Um, that is the chemical also associated with trust in relationships. And I'm going to make a very fine point here. Oxytocin, not OxyContin. Spelled similarly, have a similar sound, but not the same thing. And then serotonin, which gives you a sense of well-being. We call this the neurochemistry of persistence because when you do something that empowers your survival, you get this sort of chemical reward and you're likely to want to do it again. You are likely to persist. You're doing well and you feel comfortable in school, you're likely to want to come back. Now, we know conversely, negative feelings about an experience produce adrenaline and cortisol. This puts the brain into survival mode and causes anxiety and stress. And the last time we gave this example of flying down the five, and I know that is virtually impossible to do even in these days, but imagine if you're flying down the freeway at 100 miles an hour and you had to slam on the brakes, and you know what happens, all of a sudden you focus on what is immediately in front of you. Your brain is charged with solving the problem. And then as you sort of recover, you're feeling a little cold, a little nauseous, maybe a little anxious. And that's your brain's way of saying, stop doing stuff like this. Avoid these situations. So we know that this is the same thing. You can imagine if you are in a school setting and you're worried about being bullied or you're worried about catching up, you may have these feelings time and again and want to avoid the situation. And we know that this leads to stress. And we know that in the current climate where we're faced with a pandemic and a lot of other things, that these things can become magnified and exacerbated. I will tell you that just about everything causes stress, and stress is just the way that your brain responds. in terms of survival. And we know that a little bit of stress is a good thing. Those are the things that make us push ahead. So when we talk about positive stress, we're talking about butterflies in the stomach, anticipatory anxiety in a good way. What do we see? Brief increases in heart rate, mild elevations in stress hormone. Where we have to start worrying is when we get to tolerable. Now, tolerable stress is serious but temporary, but it's buffered by supportive relationships, people that you can go to, people who will help you along. Where it gets to be a bit dodgy is when we hit toxic stress, and that is prolonged activation of the stress response system in the absence of protective relationships. And we know that this type of stress has lasting physiological effects. It's a catalyst for underachievement and avoidance behaviors and changes the microarchitecture of the brain. But you may say to me, but wait a second, my kid has a lot of protective and supportive relationships. But remember, at this age, they are unlikely to be help seeking, and help seeking is often frowned upon, especially during adolescence. So your student may be experiencing a level of toxic stress, but you wouldn't know unless you probed further. So this presents a case for vigilance. And you know how teens are. I remember how I was. How was school? Fine. What did you do at school? Stuff. Well, how was the stuff? The stuff was fine, and that's it. So again, we talk about stress, and again, be vigilant. Now, we can also look at. We're going to start early, and I'm going to take you through social emotional development. So you will find out sort of where we started, and I didn't go all the way down to toddlerhood, but we'll go to ages 5 to 7, and we'll wind up at adulthood, just so you can see, just like when we talked about scaffolding as part of the way that the brain learns, it's basically the same for child development. So when we look at ages 5 to 7, we see this is where you begin to develop empathy, where you begin to develop friendships. You are able to identify emotions, and you have a modicum of control over your impulsive behaviors. You begin to form your self identity at this stage in life. And generally, when you look at yourself, you look at yourself in a positive light. You begin to understand family history. Now, and I don't mean 23andMe type of history, but you understand dad and grandma and grandpa and cousins and things like that. This is where you accept that parents are not all powerful. Are parents superheroes? Absolutely. Are parents absolutely amazing? They certainly are. However, this is the age where you know that they are not omnipotent. You begin to strive toward independence. And we will welcome Ms. Ramirez to our session. Good evening, Mrs. Ramirez. You're not too far behind. We're just talking about childhood, not our own childhoods, but socio-emotional aspects of childhood. You begin to start creating a system of moral values. Right and wrong, it's mostly black and white, so it's not sophisticated and it's not complex. It's not a system of ethics, but you begin to understand that some things are right and some things are wrong. This is where we become increasingly resilient. So this is a platform for all that will follow. When we get a little bit older, ages 8 and 9, and you can remember back to these times in your life, and you may see this. This is where you are concerned about peer acceptance and where you fit. So you move on from having sort of a number of acquaintances to having a best friend at this age. You're able to strengthen cooperative skills. You become more self-aware, more self-conscious. And as a result, what you do is you start to refine your self-image. Remember, in this last age group, we said it's generally positive, but you are understanding yourself in a more sophisticated way. You start to work out values and beliefs in a more sophisticated way. You start to develop an ethical sense, not sophisticated, not complex, but at least burgeoning. And you start to establish a bit more independence, a bit more individuality. And this is also the age at which we will see, notable incidences of noncompliance, both at school and at home. So you can already see how or where we're going with this. Now, when we hit early adolescence, now, remember the last time when we talked about the brain, we talked about there are two times in life where the brain grows quite rapidly, and we tend to be a little bit out of sorts. And these are two times in life where the limbic system is fully operational. Remember, that's the part of the brain that controls emotions, where the regions responsible for thinking, reflecting, and controlling response in the prefrontal cortex are still developing. So when you see middle school students and when you see high school students, you may see overt displays like everything's a tragedy. There's pain sighs and rolling eyes and blank looks. The impacts feel much more severe perhaps than they are. And generally when we get to the age in our 20s and a little bit later, our prefrontal cortex is for the most part developed, and we can consciously dampen our emotions. So when we think about teens and we think about tweens, the way they behave is not really their fault, although it kind of is really their fault. So it's incumbent upon us to try to better understand them. Here's another way of looking at it. We know that our reward systems mature before our inhibitory systems. So this is why risk taking is such a big deal. This is why emotions are such a deal. And you can see that they level out a little bit as we approach our mid to late 20s, but it is a heck of a ride while you are involved. Um, so let's talk a little bit about tweendom and teendom. When I was growing up, tweens was not a thing. I think it has become into vogue just recently. But one of the things that tends to impact kids at this age is this idea of asynchrony. So when we talk about what it means to be in sync, developmentally, we think for every year you grow physically, you should grow a year cognitively, and you should grow a year socioemotionally. But sometimes that's a little bit out of sorts, where you can grow a year physically. In some cases, you may grow 2 years cognitively and regress a year socioemotionally. So that imbalance creates problems. Now, this is also a time when we are heavily vested in our own self-concept. Self-concept is our identity. Self-esteem is how we feel about that identity. And this changes and evolves over time. You saw that picture of me, you saw what I looked like, and that has changed many, 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 many times. And you will see that during teendom, it changes even more frequently. Now, it's interesting when we look at parents and peers, because for teens and tweens, there's a desire for both autonomy and fit. Who are they? Where's the autonomy lie? With you. They want to be autonomous from you, but they want to fit in with peers. And when we talk about friendships and we talk about finding our group, we talk about the idea of homophilia, which is the search to find where we best fit. And homogamy is when we find that group and we are able to settle into it. Now, we know this is a time where peer pressure runs rampant. And again, when we look at the way that we respond to parents and the way our limbic systems are growing and things like that, we are apt to respond to it. There is even a theory about deviant peer contagion, where deviant behaviors can spread virally. So it's an interesting age to be. Now, as we move forward, I'm going to try to drop in some what I hope will be helpful hints. I'm sure things that my parents wish they knew. Interestingly enough, my father was a psychologist, which probably explains quite a bit, but he wasn't sure how to deal with me. Um, Finding age appropriate conversations. Now, I know that we as parents, and even myself as an uncle, when I see my nieces and nephews, I still see them no matter what age they are at 5 or 6 years old. I see them as coming up to me and saying, will you read me this book? So our conversations are not always accommodating this new normal, this move into adolescence. So speaking to your teens or tweens as if they were adults. That doesn't mean consult them about your stock portfolios and the like, but hear them out as you would a friend. Hear them out as you would an adult, even if you disagree. Mutual respect is paramount. So tone has a lot to do with it. Again, doesn't mean you have to agree with everything, but it's just how you approach it. So now what happens in adolescence? This is such an interesting period of life where we are changing rapidly, and sometimes it feels like we're changing daily. You can look at adolescence in three stages, the first of which is early adolescence. We're looking basically ages 10 to 14. This is the beginning of puberty. This is where you see a physical growth, you see sexual interest, limited capacity for abstract thought, but expanding intellectual interests. So the same things that make teens amazing risk takers also mean that they have an amazing capacity to learn. And we can talk about what a process that we call pruning in the brain that has to do with gray matter and other things. But you will also find that adolescents in this stage have a limited interest in the future. So when you talk to them about years to come, years from now, they're not really there yet. But they're starting to develop deeper moral thinking during early adolescence, but don't really have a conception of the future. So when you say, well, how are you going to think about yourself when you're 30 years old? You might as well say how we're going to think about yourself when you're 300 years old, because they aren't grasping it really. Another sort of a helpful tip is conversation as obligation. And we are all busy. We are all stretched threadbare. And sometimes, you'll have your teen and tween come up to you and they're talking about One Direction and they're talking about BTS and they're talking about, all of these bands and, what happened in the hallway today. And it's of critical importance to them. And it's easy to go, and communicate outward. So when they want to talk, it is a beautiful thing. So make it meaningful. Although it may drive you around the bend, your children are also going to know when you're pandering. So if you're feigning interest, the idea is that you want to notice and you want to appreciate what they have to say, even if it doesn't necessarily mean anything to you, because it factors in to their identity formation and self-concept. So I have sort of endured all of Pokemon, I have endured all of Minecraft, and I've endured all of Fortnite, and I have endured all of anything that you can imagine, TikTok, and they explain it with such passion, and I listen with great intent as a way to show respect. So we've gone from age 5, and here we are at middle adolescence. This is typically ages 15 to 17. Puberty is pretty much completed. Physical growth is slowing for females, but continuing for males. You remember we talked about abstract thought. This is where you're going to see a bit of growth. This is where you're going to start thinking about long-term goals, interests in the meaning of life and where they are, interest in moral reasoning, social and emotional changes, including self-involvement and drive for independence. This is where you will see them, dressing differently from 1 month to the next. This is really where they're trying to find out where they fit, and they'll go through a number of personalities. Dr. Ward, did you?
No, I was just saying bye to someone that was leaving.
Oh,
so sorry.
Oh, I thought you had a question, or I thought you were saying, "Yep, you were absolutely right."
Well, you are absolutely right too, but yes.
Bye from us too to person leaving. but I remember at this age, I mean, you saw a picture of me at this age. That didn't last very long. And I was sort of trying on different outfits and trying on different identities as I tried to figure out where I fit. The last thing I wanted to be is anything like my parents, and I turned into them. That's where I wound up. So rest assured, you're going to get there. It's going to take a while, but you'll get there. Now, when we get into late adolescence, we're getting into young adulthood, fewer physical developments, more cognitive developments, starting to think rationally, delaying gratification. And I would say that's pretty a late adolescence. This has been stymied a bit by social media and the internet, where you don't delay gratification for anything these days. But I remember this was a pointed conversation with my mother about she was saying, you have to learn how to delay gratification. You can't have everything when you want it. I think if she was alive today and saw Amazon and all of those things, she might give that a second thought. But this is where you start to plan for the future and gain a firm sense of identity. You also see increased emotional stability, because remember, we were talking about the limbic system, we were talking about how it grows, and independence as well. Another bit of pointed advice. Again, you're incredibly busy. We're all doing 20 things at once. Now, I remember, now, Mrs. Curious, I'm surprised you didn't call me on this, because the last time we met, when we were talking about the brain, I said there's no such thing as multitasking. You're doing many things very quickly, but not actually multitasking. I'm using this in the sort of colloquial form of the word multitasking, but we're all doing 20 things at once, especially now. But again, when your teen or tween is talking, give them your full attention. One of the things that we are hearing from our work with students and teachers who are talking about remote learning is the thing that they miss the most is meaningful interaction and the spontaneity that comes with being together. And again, it's easy as, that one golden time where your teen or tween is talking about all of the stuff that's going on with them, and you're trying to set a meeting and you're trying to do all of these things. Make sure you listen. And if you're wondering when to do this, it's going to be in the evenings or in the car. That's your sweet spot. When you're driving somewhere, it is going to flow like a stream. So just make sure that you are attentive, and you should be if you're driving anyway. So really a large part of what we're doing is trying to develop an identity. And this is a way of looking at it. And the question here, it's a philosophical question. Nobody's asking it out loud, but the idea is, if I am not my parents, who am I? And this is how your tween and your teen are trying to find their identity. And identity achievement is sort of the last box there to the right. And that's what we all strive for, where we have explored different identities, and we can then make an informed decision and sort of commit to one. Now you can see, when we look at identity diffusion, that's really where we begin. We haven't really explored any identities. We're waiting for that. And we haven't committed to anything. We go through a moratorium where we are exploring but haven't yet committed. Now you'll see foreclosure. And foreclosure, when we talk about identity formation, is a premature commitment. So I'm going to be a lawyer because my father was a lawyer. So you don't explore, you just say, this is who I am. You'll see this a lot in gifted and talented kids. They will be watching a medical show. They'll see a doctor and just sort of become enamored with it. And even if they don't like people, and they don't like biology, and they don't like chemistry, and they don't like blood, well, they saw it and they said they were going to do it, and they are going to stick with it, even if it is to spite everyone. So foreclosure is basically saying, I'm doing this because my family did it, I'm doing this because my friends are doing it, or I'm doing the opposite because my dad was doing it. And I went through this myself. My father was a psychologist, and he was also a professor at UC San Francisco. And the last thing I ever wanted to be is associated with higher education or the University of California. And that was my foreclosure commitment. And you can see where that wound up. So this sort of gives you an idea. So when you see your tweens and teens trying to find themselves, this is the process that they go through. Trust is a huge issue, and the thing is, you are not going to have unless it sort of builds and explodes later, you're not going to have a long conversation with your teens about their understanding of your trust for them. Now, of course, when your kids leave the house with the car keys in hand, you're going to be worried. That's natural. You're naturally concerned. But calling out and saying, "Oh, drive safely," may not be the best time to express that emotion, not because it's not sincere, not because it's not valued, but the where they may be taking it is, "You don't trust me. I don't understand. Of course I'm going to drive safely." So timing is everything. And usually until they've indicated otherwise, trust that they will live up to your expectations, bid them adieu with love, but bite your tongue on the other stuff. Again, just helping you get through the day. Now, what goes on in adolescence? What are some of the things that we see? Number one, now these are common things. I'm not saying don't be anxious about them, but you're going to see this, and you may remember back to when you were an adolescent engaging in some of this. Um, Lying. Why are teenagers lying? Well, they're afraid of the consequences. It's not an elaborate plot or an elaborate conspiracy. They're just worried about what you will do. When they argue with you, sometimes they may agree with you, but they're arguing for the sake of arguing because they want to establish independence. Um, Defiance, same reason. Um, every teenager, maybe with very few exceptions, is going to go through an awkward phase. And you'll see they're plugging along developmentally, and then all of a sudden they just hit this phase where they're not sure who they are, and they're really very self-conscious, and they're really very self-aware. That's okay. It's time bound. There's going to be a period where they don't feel as though they fit in, even if they do, and they'll get over that soon. Abandoning commitments, giving up. This also has to do with sort of a very self-focus during this age. You will see withdrawal from family, and don't worry, they are going to come back. Everything great that you've taught them, they are going to remember. But at this age, it's peer and friend centric. The only way I can figure out how to explain this is attitude. And I think when we talk about attitude, I think we all sort of know what we're talking about when we talk about attitude. And parents just don't understand, which actually was a big hit in my early 20s, if you're familiar with the song. Impulsivity, that has a lot to do with the developing brain and our risk-taking behaviors. Academic problems are usually a function of setting priorities. So you may be, doing fine up until you hit maybe middle school or high school, but for the kids, their priorities are different. They're making friends, they're fitting into a group, they are going along with everybody else. So academics may not be at front of mind. Now, of course, at E3, I know that academics are absolutely a priority, and that has nothing to do with the school or you as parents. It just has to do with how kids grow up. Things like curfew violations, a lot of this is just testing boundaries. It's not malfeasance. It's just to say, how far can I push the envelope? And anybody who's been around teens know that that's a specialty. Um, Trying too hard. So we talked about sort of not paying attention or not having authentic conversations. Um, this is the opposite end of the spectrum, where you want to get your kids talking. And if you force it, it is never going to be good, because it's going to always feel a bit artificial. Um, One of the things that sort of takes teens by surprise is when you solicit advice from them, where they can help you solve a problem, where they are taking the lead, where they are empowered. So that not only shows that you care about what they think, but it shows that you are human, that you are also vulnerable. And that is empowering when you consult them about that. So rather than trying to force a conversation about, things like Snapchat, ask them for some advice or ask them what they think, what they would do. Other common behaviors in adolescence: low impulse control, increase in appetite. Suddenly, these are kids who are eating you out of house and home. Lack of frustration tolerance. This is sort of executive function. Short fuse may be hormonal. So a lot of times, that teens are reluctant to seek help, and they are reluctant to talk about what's bothering them. So they're pushing it down, and you may just have um, the unfortunate timing to say, could you pick up your towel? And all of a sudden, it is a barrage like one has never seen before. So again, some of it is hormonal, some of it is executive function related, but you're going to see very exaggerated responses to things that should be small. Again, things like verbal aggression, you always want to keep an eye on that. Concern about physical appearance. This really hits hard. We talked about 5-year-olds and 7-year-olds and seeing themselves very positively. Now, if they don't have the specific brand, or if a hair is out of place, they're always sort of self-evaluating. Sleeping longer and more soundly. We know that teenagers tend to need more sleep, almost 10 hours. So you will see them sleeping longer and more soundly. Selfishness, really a concern about themselves, probably before others. You will find them with bouts of low self-esteem, and sometimes it'll be a bit of a roller coaster. Greater interest in privacy, and I always see, parents and caregivers would say, but we always used to talk, we always used to have these conversations. Now they're keeping thoughts a bit to themselves. Frequent changes in relationships, and I don't necessarily mean romantic relationships, but also friendships. Again, this is part of trying on an identity. Now, in terms of helping behaviors, um, I think as parents and as educators, we want to jump in. We want to help. Um, and Instinctually, we may finish somebody's stories, or we might laugh before it's time. But I think what we are trying to say here is not only be respectful, don't just be attentive, but be a good listener. Listen and hear. If you think about how you would behave with a friend of yours, it's really just about the same. And again, I know that we tend to see our kids as pretty young, um, and we want to be good parents, but this is really more about respect. Um, Low motivation. There's always a concern. You were such a good student in fifth grade. What happened? Again, it does happen, and it has happened to the best of us. You are talking to a person who was lucky if I hit a 1.0 in high school and I got out because I had a counselor who took pity upon me, but it does happen. A lot of this has to do with biological changes and establishment of priorities. At this time in life, emotional concerns are predominant. So that all of that motivation, it is going there. And I see there is something in the chat. Oh, you are joking. Oh, no, I'm not. And I have the records. I have the records to prove it, Dr. Ward. Um, the school environment. We talk about the importance of transitions. So, we talked about being stuck in the middle, and we were talking about middle school, but it is such an important period of time, because when you go from fifth to sixth, it is a huge transition. And when you go from eighth to ninth, it is a huge transition. And these are transitions that we have to navigate. When you go from elementary to middle school, it's almost like going to a different country. There are a lot more people, the landscape is different, all of those types of things. So school environment can play an important role in this. Social and peer pressures, we've known this since our time in caves. Shifting in self-perception. Interestingly, when we are in late childhood, we tend to have a growth mindset. We're open to new things. We think that we can. As we move into adolescence, we're prone to develop a fixed mindset, and that is just sort of the way that our brains and emotions work together. Short attention span. This is not helped by social media. And when we get to our session on social media, we will talk about this in the extreme. But let's just say that social media has not helped us lengthen our fuse or increase our attention spans. Unrealistic expectations and underdeveloped work ethic, things like that, are also important. Now, when to you're always going to be vigilant, but when should you have a bit more concern? Extreme changes in weight or appearance, insomnia, ongoing sleep problems. So this is not, well, I mean, it could be sleeping too long, but generally it has to do with insomnia. Rapid or drastic personality changes. And I'm not just talking about trying to find, who you are. I'm talking about when you go from one extreme to another. Um, Relationships do change frequently, but not suddenly and not constant. Persistent academic failure. Of course, suicidal talk or ideation, self harm, we know that is very important as a warning sign. Substance abuse beyond experimentation. Now, experimentation tends to go along with adolescence, but substance abuse does not. Violence, bullying, or threats, absolutely. Cruelty to animals, also something. Fantasizing about acts of violence and run ins with the law are also important. Um, Now, one of the things that is important at this age is choice and volition. It doesn't mean that they get to choose everything that they want to do, but there are a lot of parents who want us to live who want to live vicariously through their children, or want us to follow in their footsteps. And I mean, it's admirable, but it may not be the best ideas, because remember, at this age they're hardwired to seek independence, and that goes along with healthy identity formation. They should absolutely be involved in something, but it should be something that fuels their passions and allows them to succeed. And I know that there was one point that my father wanted me to take over his practice, and I just sort of pushed away against it. But the idea here is, let them be passionate about what they're going to be passionate about, and they will develop all of the wonderful skills and capabilities that will allow them to succeed. And how can we do this practically? Set yourself up as an exemplar of what you'd like to see. It doesn't mean to say, you see what I'm doing here? You see how I'm persistently reading this book? This is what you should be doing. But so set yourself up as a model. Help them set lofty goals and provide a pathway to achieving them. So again, they may be in sort of a fixed mindset, and you want to help them be aspirational, but not just say, here's a goal that you should pursue, but hey, let's look at how you can get there. I remember when I was in seventh grade, my mother told my seventh grade counselor that I had to go to an Ivy League school, which was a wonderfully aspirational goal, but neither of us knew how to get there. So it really didn't help, and it wound up putting a lot of pressure on me as a child. Steering them towards appropriate courses and activities, offering smart levels of support. Find strengths and build upon them. We know this from our brain compatible workshop. We know what the neurochemistry of persistence looks like, and we know that is critical in creating a love of learning. We know what flow looks like, and we want them to feel that. Communicate with teachers and schools as warranted. And a lot of this has to do, especially nowadays, with clarity of expectations and clarity of processes. What I'm not suggesting is whenever you find an article about pedagogy, you go find the teacher, knock at the door, and you, hey, look what I found. Look what I found. Have you read this? But the idea that we all come together, we all are, the only way that we succeed is when we walk together down this path, that we speak a common language, albeit in different dialects. Maintaining realistic expectations. Love them for who they are, not what they do, or not who they could be. And be patient. This too will pass. Um, I mean, I certainly have apologized to my parents endlessly about my years as an adolescent. But you know, whatever you're seeing, it will pass. Um, some other tricks of the trade, some friendly advice. Dealing with anger, and we talked about this sort of, you know, uneven reaction to small things. Um, we know that the best way to calm an angry teen is to remain calm yourself. Matching volume is not going to help. And just remember that whatever the issue is, address it in the moment. Don't let them just sort of compact it. You don't want them to turn into a pressure cooker. Lying and concealing. A lot of this is about picking your battles and making sure that they understand that communication with you is going to be open and as non-judgmental as is possible. This doesn't mean to say that whatever you do is fine, don't worry about it, but you know that you will be understanding. Teens are bound to lie. It just comes with the territory. But if you offer honesty and truth from your side, you might find that they'll do so less and less because you're establishing a trustful relationship. Indecisiveness, natural during the adolescent years. So one of the things that I think that schools, especially schools like E3, try to do and do very well is introduce decision-making skills. It's part of that group of essential skills: critical thinking, critical decision-making. This is not the same thing as making the decision for them. Give them the tools to better understand how to evaluate. Arguing in defiance, we know that young adults need guidance in terms of rules and consequences. Remain clear, remain firm, and you know, empower them to become involved in the process of developing rules. When you talk to kids about education, they'll say, I don't have a choice, it's foisted upon me. When we talk about rules, I remember a year living under my roof and this is how it's going to be. I never had a say in establishing rules or establishing consequences, and I'd probably be more likely to better understand the consequences if I had some say. Doesn't mean let them set the rules, because certainly that would not be advantageous for you, but give them a voice in it. Um, Open and trusting relationships. Just as we tell teachers, the best way to teach, you know, I can give you 1,000 strategies, but it all comes down to knowing those in your charge in great depth and knowing what makes them tick. Same thing. Open and trusting relationship. Roll with the punches. In the moment, it just can feel frustrating and feel bad, but roll with it. Empathize. We all went through this. And I know that I look at my niece and my nephew, and sometimes I just want to pull my hair out, especially when they are at Zoom school and wind up walking away from the camera. But again, we all went through this. I went through it. We all did. Try to put yourself in your teen shoes when possible, not literally in your teen shoes, especially because they might not look as good on you as they look on them. Respect them. It comes back to you. It's all about establishing trust and respect. Seek and offer help. Encourage help-seeking behaviors. At this age, they just don't do it. But they need to understand that it's okay and that we all need help. We all need a little bit of support sometime. Um, Most of all, show them that you care. It's the little things that count. It's the little things, and they're not always going to respond to it. You'll give them a pat and say, you know how much I love you, and they'll go, oh, mom, or oh, dad, leave me alone. But internally, it makes them feel good. Love them no matter what. So I know that we are just about at time, but and Mrs. Sequeiros, if you had any questions, Dr. Ward, if you had any questions or comments, please feel free. I'm going to put my contact information up here in case you need to reach me. And please rest assured, those of you out in the vast E3 audience, if you have questions, send me an email and I will answer you within 24 hours.
Thank you, Dr. Appel. I do have two high schoolers myself, and I have been in the high school arena a long time, but you have given me some wonderful new information and information that I knew, but just became much clearer to me today. Right. So thank you so much.
Of course. And we are all in this together, even me. I'm in this with you. I'm in here to help in as much as possible. Ms. Sequeiros, were you going to say something?
Yes, I was going to say, where were you 4 years ago?
Well, well, you can always backwards map this, but hopefully it brings some clarity to things that you may have seen. Certainly all of this is impactful, but when I think looking at the whys behind the whats, at least you can say, okay, so it happens to everyone. And I think that the greatest anxiety parents fear is the greatest anxiety associated with things like the pandemic, that this is only happening to me. But trust me, even way back when in the times of cave people, there were cave teens who were just driving their parents crazy. So again, if there's anything you need, please just feel free to drop me an email and I will get back to you within 20